I want to welcome you to our 160th online gathering for congregational leaders across the country. This weekly gathering is called Courageous Leadership, and it's sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jill Beverlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the program director for this ministry and one of your facilitators today. As we begin, I want to again name our ministry's commitment to the truth and healing movement in the ELCA. And as such, I've made it a practice to offer a land acknowledgement as we start our Courageous Leader gatherings. As I read my land acknowledgement, Jason will put into the chat a link to the place where you can learn more about the truth and healing movement and also find information about the Native peoples that have called where you currently live home. I also invite you to share in the chat at this time your own land acknowledgements. This is an opportunity to practice courage in speaking the truth about our relationship with our Native Indigenous siblings and our individual commitment to the work of truth and healing. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., there will be a class on Indigenous thought and theology presented by colleague Vance Blackbox. The link to join this class can be found on the Truth and Healing page of ELCA's website. Jason, again, will post the link in the chat. Friends, there are going to be lots of links that Jason is posting today, so just be ready for that. And with all this, friends, I want you to know that my home is located on the Fox River in Appleton, Wisconsin. This area is the ancestral territory of 5 nations of Native Indigenous peoples: the Menominee tribe, the Ho-Chunk Winnebago tribe, the Potawatomi tribe, the Oneida tribe, and the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans and the Brothertown community. I honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which I live. Okay, friends, and so as we step into our time, I encourage us to remember that we are seeking to create a safer and braver space in these gatherings for you to bring the truth of who you are and how you are doing. These conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. Again, welcome. We are so glad that each of you are here, and we are deeply honored to have these 2 very special and very courageous leaders with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Rayad Abudris, Program Manager for ELCA's Amparo US Network, and Dennis Fredo, Consultant for Witnessing in Society with ELCA's Service and Justice Unit. Rayad and Dennis will be sharing their insights regarding what's happening in the Holy Land. As they share, we encourage you to listen through the lens of coaching. How might we stay curious about what all this means, while at the same time feeling empowered to bring our compassion and care to these hurting spaces? What is our role in helping to heal war-torn places such as Gaza? What is possible when solutions seem impossible? Rayad and Dennis, thank you for being with us and bringing your vulnerability, your stories, and your wisdom to share. Welcome to our Courageous Leadership space.
All right. First, I'd like to express, a lot of gratitude for the possibility to be with you here today, and for your generosity. And also, I really, it's just, I feel like it's going to be overwhelming to talk to people like you who are leaders in your communities, and so I feel like what I'm bringing to you today is simply a personal experience that that I hope can be a little bit enlightening in the sense of what a Christian from Palestine has been going through. And so in order to start, if I may share a map so we can. Okay. So basically, I didn't have a title for this map for a good reason, because it's one of the things that kind of bring me anxiety, is that the possibility that this particular map has been that point of contention, and in the sense, because depending on where you're coming at it, so this map could mean different things to different people, and also means different things based on the time period we want to talk about. So sometimes it's difficult to, where do I begin? Are we talking about today, this part of the Holy Land today, or do we talk about 1948 or 67? Do we talk about 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago when Jesus was walking this land? So this this map has changed inhabitants, it changed borders, names of cities, languages. It all really depends on what time you want to look at it. So for today's purposes, I would like to look at it from the time I have experienced it. So when I was born. And I'd like to focus more on, if you see in the close to Jerusalem, Bethlehem that's where I was born and raised. And basically, to me, this has always been Bethlehem. When growing up, we were not allowed to call it Palestine. Like, we were not allowed to have a Palestinian flag or even call it Palestine. It was Israel. It was part of the under Israeli occupation. And later on, this developed, and now you have international bodies calling it the Palestinian territories, the West Bank. But to me, right now, it seems appropriate to call it part of Palestine. So growing up in Bethlehem, I'm trying to move the mouse. Here we go. So I've moved to Texas a couple of months ago, so I don't have a lot of pictures from back home. Those are two pictures I found of my childhood. This is myself and my siblings, and that's the other picture is my father and grandfather, and also with my siblings celebrating St. George's Day. So basically, I grew up in an Orthodox Christian family. This is the tradition I grew up in, but I went to a Lutheran school, Talitha Kumi school. Maybe some of you are familiar with it in Beit Jala. And so to me, the Lutheran church has always felt like home. Having gone to the Lutheran school for 12 years, daily services in the morning. So like I said, growing up in this atmosphere has always felt like I belong to the Lutheran Church. And I had a decent, maybe more privileged upbringing. This is a private school, good education. It felt always, obviously, growing up in the 80s, that's when the first Intifada happened, the first uprising. And so this type of living was coupled with some violent events. I remember military raids to our school, tear gas. I remember my uncle being arrested. These types of things were part of our daily existence, unfortunately. And so after the first Intifada, and I can maybe stop sharing so it's not as distracting. Yeah. So I forgot what I was talking about. After this period of time, there was a period of relative peace, and being part of this environment, part of this Christian school, I was involved also in peace initiatives with Israeli children. We traveled together to Germany, we prayed, we had we sang in choirs, in churches, because it felt like this is the right thing to do. We wanted to work towards peace. Developed friendships with Israeli youth back then. But unfortunately, this was short-lived because a few years later, the second Intifada happened. Some of the friends I made joined the army. the Israeli army, and it the whole the relationship changed quite a bit. And so I don't want to focus too much on that. After that, we had the Palestinian Authority, having lived in. There was always daily struggles, not being able to travel, not being able to go to checkpoints or to hospitals, the issue with shortages of water. So there were daily restrictions on our daily life, and this was unfortunately the norm, having lived there. I was privileged again in 2001 to move to the States, and this is where some of the changes to my perspective happened. Basically, I moved in 2001, right before 9/11. And so basically, right after 9/11, I had to talk to some of my co-workers about what does that mean to be Palestinian. There were also issues of, well, you Palestinians kind of supported 9/11, and things that I had to defend, like, obviously, personally, the people I know, people I grew up with, my community, everybody I knew was kind of shocked by that. And so I felt like I had to be defending myself and my people all the time because of that. But what I've noticed that once I was able to calmly explain who I was, where I was coming from, and with time, I realized that the people who were hostile towards me and my people, I basically won them over. They understood who I was. They understood there's a complexity in what being Palestinian isn't a monolithic group. There are different peoples, different faiths. And so with patience, I felt like those people who were aggressive were not coming at me from a point of hatred. They were coming at me from a point of either ignorance, or they've been influenced for so many years by different information. And so I felt like it was my role to continuously explain about the conflict, explain about some of the realities of what Palestinians are going through. So that was me dealing with the Western audiences. I went back to Palestine and I worked with Christian organizations. And during that time, my role was to advocate and maybe communicate about some of the struggles that of Palestinian children or Palestinian Christians. And the thing that I felt was most effective was just being truthful, describing the situation in a truthful way, representing all sides. And what I felt was most effective was when people actually came to the Holy Land and visited and walked and saw the checkpoints and saw the realities. That was much better than any type of advocacy or reports or videos that I could have ever done. And so my calling was always telling people, please come and see for yourself. Come and see. And that's how I feel like, that was the most effective way of changing people's perspective, and not necessarily making them take different sides, but it was just having the fuller picture and being able to understand the complexity of the situation. And I feel like today, this is really needed. This is the thing that needed the most, because of, especially with the most recent violent incidents. So each person comes from different background, and what we bring to the table is what we've learned through childhood, through church, through our relationships. And it's important to kind of not take that out of the equation, and be able to address all of these things. So when as a Christian who has struggled basically with where do I stand on a conflict like that? I mean, as a Christian, I know that I need to be working towards peace. This is my priority. Um, I should always reject violence. I mean, what would Jesus do in this situation? And sometimes it was a struggle because having lived through this continuous injustice, having seen the the more negative, dark side of the occupation, it was difficult to simply dismiss it and simply uh, think of it as, well, this is part of life and we need to move on. This was always part of, like, I've lost friends. I've lost people who were killed. We have a piece of land that was simply taken so there was a road that connects settlements together. And so those are parts of our memories, our family traditions, so those things are always going to be with me. And so these types of things make it difficult to live out your Christian faith in the sense that to advocate for peace and basically not kind of condemning any type of resistance by the Palestinian people. So what I felt was true to my identity is to stick to truth. Like for example, as a Christian, I am against any type of violence. So what happened recently in Gaza, definitely what Hamas did was despicable. It's something that's I would never do, obviously. But the thing is, this needs to be coupled with showing the entire picture of how things are happening, why such things are happening, not to justify it, but to kind of understand it, and also be able to communicate about it. And I feel like, in a sense, this will always be a difficult conflict. It will always be a difficult subject to talk about. There's a reason why there's no easy solution, and I don't know if should call it an advice, because I'm still struggling with it. It's always going to be a difficulty for me to find myself, find my place within this conflict. I am grew up as a Palestinian. I feel affinity to that land. I feel affinity to the people. I feel like I'm outraged by the continuous injustice by it. At the same time, I will always want peace. I will always want there to be an end to a conflict. Again, I don't want to continue to talk about the same point. I'd love to hear your questions and your opinions, and maybe there are a lot of things that I left out, of my personal encounters here in the States or growing up. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you for listening.
Red, thank you for sharing so much of yourself and for the vulnerability of your personal story, what it's like to be connected to this place, this space, to have that form who you are today. That lens is important for us to hear. And friends, I hope that you heard in Red sharing the power of of sharing itself, and of listening, and of patience, and what all of that has done in his story to help dispel some of the myths, some of the misunderstandings that are related to the reality of what's happening in the Holy Land. And so, friends, now we're going to hear from colleague Dennis. So, Dennis, the baton is yours, and please go ahead and continue to frame what you are here to share.
Thanks, Joel. And thanks everyone for um, having me with you today. Um, it's interesting that we meet today because it is the UN's declared International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. So there have been different events going on across the street. I'm actually at the office I used to be here at before I retired, the Lutheran Office for World Community, and so the number of things going on there, and if you really want to find out more about that, you can go to the UN website, UN Web TV, and that will guide you to some of the recordings of the meetings that have happened today. And just I wanted to say at the beginning that there's going to be a number of links, as Jason has just indicated, that we're going to be sharing with you afterward that I'll be referencing along the way. And so you'll have a chance to explore those more. So I'm going to talk mainly about what we've been doing on the advocacy side as the ELCA in collaboration with others. And largely that has been with the Churches for Middle East Peace, which is an organization of about 40 different Christian churches and organizations across the U.S. working on peace in the Middle East. And I would say for these last 5 or 6 weeks, our main message to U.S. officials has been threefold. First, we want them to publicly call for a ceasefire to prevent further loss of life. We want them to prioritize the protection of civilians, including by urgently securing the entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza and working to secure the release of hostages and detainees. And thirdly, to urge all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law. And this is a pretty tall order, perhaps, but it's one that we've been pressing with members of Congress and with the administration. And now, actually, just before we started here, Churches for Middle East Peace released a letter that has been signed by 65 global Christian leaders to their respective governments, again, calling for a ceasefire and working for peace. We'll be able to share that with you a little bit later, but it's literally just out before we started here. I wanted to give a little background on some of the principles that we've been utilizing in the last period in particular, but these are actually really timeless matters. One was sort of summarized by Professor Tom Dannenbaum, who is at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He said, neither the safety and liberty of the hostages nor the most basic needs of the population of Gaza may be instrumentalized to try to coerce the adversary to do what it ought to be doing. The hostages must be released unconditionally. Aid must be allowed in unconditionally. And you don't put one before the other or make it a requirement of one for the other. We have here 2 short videos from the International Committee of the Red Cross that we're going to be showing you. The first is talking about this matter of how the conflict has affected a number of hospitals in Gaza. You probably know about the explosive device that hit the Ali Hospital a couple of weeks ago. There's still a lot of debate about who actually was responsible for that, but it caused quite a lot of destruction, and there have been also attacks subsequent to that on other hospitals. But the first one is, well, both cases, it's the one of the legal advisors for the International Committee of the Red Cross. And the International Committee, just to set this up, they are doing their work based on the Geneva Conventions of 1949, which set forth international humanitarian law, and they provide humanitarian protection and assistance to victims of armed conflict and other situations of violence. And they take action to respond to emergencies and promote respect for international humanitarian law and the implementation of national law alongside that. So maybe, Jason, if we can share that first clip.
Hospitals are especially protected under international humanitarian law because of the life-saving function that they have for the wounded and sick. This means that parties to conflicts cannot attack hospitals and they cannot otherwise prevent them from performing their medical functions. That said, they can lose their protection if they are used outside of their humanitarian function to commit acts harmful to the enemy. This can be something like hiding able-bodied fighters or using them as a weapons depot. Now, the party has to do everything feasible to verify that it has lost its protected status. This means it has to do factual assessment before the attack on the basis of the facts reasonably available to it. So the first thing when a hospital has lost its protected status is that a warning has to be given. And the purpose of such a warning is to allow those who misuse the hospital to stop the acts harmful to the enemy, or if they persist, to allow for the safe evacuation of patients and medical staff. Now, of course, evacuation isn't always feasible of patients in hospitals, and even less so, of course, in conflict situations. This does not mean there's a free license to attack. Under IHL, every attack is always subject to the principles of proportionality and precaution. This means that the party to the conflict has to do everything feasible in order to avoid or at least minimize harm to patients and medical staff. And under the principle of proportionality, the party has to ask itself, will the death, the injury, the destruction caused by this operation not be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage pursued? And when you picture a hospital in a fighting zone, it's most probable that the harm to healthcare services and delivery will not only be in the short term, but also in the medium and the long term. In a situation of conflict, where the delivery of health service is all the more crucial because of the high number of wounded and sick.
Yeah, so that's the first one that we wanted to share with you. And then, of course, one of the things that's been also controversial has been the question of should there be humanitarian pauses, or should we have a long-term ceasefire? All these sorts of questions. And so this next clip from the legal officer will also talk about the matter of humanitarian pauses and corridors and things of that sort, and underlying the essential point that the warring parties have obligations to protect civilians and aid workers. Jason.
International humanitarian law doesn't specifically mention or define humanitarian pauses, corridors, or ceasefires. What it does, it is foresees and encourages parties to find local arrangements in order for humanitarian relief operations to be able to carry out and to evacuate the injured and the sick. So therefore, it doesn't really matter what the term used is. What matters is that such arrangements can be effective to allow for rapid and unimpeded humanitarian action, and also, again, to allow for the fact that humanitarian relief personnel are respected and protected and can move in order to reach the civilians in need. And remember that in any case, whether there's a humanitarian pause or corridor or not, ultimately the warring parties, the fighting parties, must always take all possible measures and precautions in order to protect civilians, including humanitarian relief personnel.
Thanks. So, the point of this, of course, is to give you some background on some of the principles that we've been supporting going forward, because, of course, there's a lot of discussion about the status of some hospitals who went after them in the conflict, and also what kind of pause that we're in at the moment or longer term can be accomplished. But I think it's fair to say that we, as the churches, have strongly supported a permanent ceasefire because we believe that's the only way that we're going to prevent the further loss of life and get to some kind of negotiations, which inevitably will have to happen anyway. One of the other things I wanted to suggest for you as we go forward is to make sure that you consult a variety of news sources, and not just the American ones. And then do your best to verify the items that are presented as quote unquote facts. A lot of people are putting forward things. Even yesterday, I saw something on social media, somebody describing something as a fact, and I said, no, not really. It's really an opinion. But I wanted to share with you this. There's an infographic that the UN did some weeks ago about. It was concerning how people are sharing things online that may or may not be accurate. And I think these principles here, these 5 principles, are worth considering. Whether you're talking about your own sharing of information or you're trying to assess what the source said, who made it, what is the source, where did it come from, why might you be sharing it, and when was it published? Because just to take the current one of the examples I just mentioned a little while ago, there was an initial assessment of who was responsible for the explosion at the Ali hospital, and depending on who your source was, you hear that it was either Hamas or the Israelis, and those sorts of things only can really be, in my view, completely verified when you have a capacity to see the situation and have the experts look at what, in this case, what munitions were involved. And it's not easy in the immediate term to assess, who was responsible. Having said that, one of the things that we are very concerned about is the effects of whatever is happening. So, while there may be a debate over whether the Israeli forces, the IDF in this case, was intending to create widespread damage and attack civilians, or only that, as they claim, they were going after Hamas. Regardless of that, the fact is that the combat has had indiscriminate effects, and that is what is a concern to us. That that kind of warfare is not permissible. And since we're talking about terminology, it's been, of course, a highly charged aspect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before and since October 7th. That is about terminology. For more than 2 decades, it's been debated whether we have a separation wall or a barrier or a fence in the West Bank and around Jerusalem. That's just one example that's been there now for a while. And, right now, I think some of the current examples include the use of the terms terrorists or militants. And then we get into these other areas like, what is genocide? What is ethnic cleansing? I wanted to share with you a clip here from a Holocaust survivor who has commented on the use of these terms. It's a professor, I believe he's here at New York University. Anyway, Professor Bartov had some thoughts to share there.
As the Israel-Hamas war continues, we're hearing words like genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity thrown around. But what do they actually mean? And more importantly, how are they enforced? Joining us now is an expert on this exact topic, Omer Bartov, professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with October 7th. Hamas entered Israel, brutally murdering, kidnapping adults and children. How are the events of that day defined?
Hello, good evening, and thank you for having me. The attack of October 7th could certainly be defined as a war crime and a crime against humanity. And if you connect it to Hamas ideology, you might call it also a genocidal act.
the word genocide, in what context is it actually appropriate to label this on either side as a genocide?
Well, genocide is actually quite notoriously difficult to identify, unlike war crimes or even crimes against humanity, because the UN definition of genocide from 1948 defines it as the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. So in genocide, what is needed to identify genocide is first to see that there is an intent, and then that the intent is being implemented vis-a-vis a group. So it's not simply the killing of individuals, but killing them as members of a group. And these are very difficult to identify, and I would say that at the present, while there have been statements, certainly by Israeli political leaders and military leaders, that indicate genocidal intent, I do not think that that's what's happening on the ground, and that's the goal at the moment.
And so on either side, you don't feel it's appropriate to describe it as a genocide?
On the side of Hamas, because the Hamas founding statement from 1988 speaks about the destruction of the state of Israel, you might be able to draw that line, but I would be skeptical about that. I would say that it's clearly a war crime, that massacre. It's likely a crime against humanity, which means that killing large numbers of people, but not necessarily genocide.
And on the reverse, just, that we have at least 4,000 Palestinian children who've been killed, that also does not qualify as genocide.
Well, it would if the goal were to destroy the Palestinian people as such. That is, that you are killing people with the intent to destroy the group. And generally, Israeli statements don't put it that way. What they're trying to say is that the goal is to destroy Hamas as a military and political organization, but Hamas is hiding among civilians in highly congested areas, and therefore there's a great deal of so-called collateral damage. I would say that the law of proportionality for war crimes, which has to do with the relationship between your military goal and the damage you cause to civilians, has been breached to the extent that it's quite possible that one could define these acts as war crimes because of the very high numbers of civilians who were killed, but I don't think it rises yet to the degree of genocide.
You co-wrote an open letter on the misuse of Holocaust memory and invoking in the aftermath of October 7th. In it, you and fellow colleagues say appealing to the memory of the Holocaust obscures our understanding of the anti-Semitism Jews face today and dangerously misrepresents the causes of violence in Israel-Palestine. Explain to us what you mean by that.
I think, both the word Holocaust, the name Holocaust and genocide are being misused on both sides. In the case of genocide, people want to use the term genocide because it sounds like the most extreme crime, which it is, but it doesn't mean that crimes against humanity or war crimes are any better. They're just defined differently. In terms of using the word Holocaust, what it does, it identifies your enemy as someone who is filled with hatred and anti-Semitism to the extent that there are no longer any partners that you can deal with. And to a large extent, I would say that the Israeli government has wanted to do that because it does not want to negotiate at all with Palestinians. It's not interested in any two-state solution or any political solution. And so it would rather identify, as it has, Hamas as human animals or as Nazis, to say, well, we can't talk with them. The only thing we can do with them is either kill them or put them behind a fence.
Omer Bartov, professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. So appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
So thanks. We wanted to share with you, that's one perspective. And I have to say at the outset that not everyone is agreeing with Professor Bartov and what he's had to say. I think there's a lot of merit there, but there's a lot of discussion about that. I think one of the other things that's really hard to deal with is, we can never fully know unless people say directly what their intent is. And so, you can say, well, somebody intended to do something. Well, maybe, but maybe not. And unless they fully state that that's what they're planning to do. So I think this is always one of the difficulties as well here, in particular current situation. I wanted to just mention a couple of things before closing, and that is that hate speech and hate crimes, of course, have been on the rise, especially since October 7th. And I wanted to remind you that Bishop Eaton issued a short video about this on November 1st. And that and another article about hate speech and hate crimes we will be sharing with you. And generally, I just want to say that we'll be sharing with you a number of the important websites that we have created. That is the church-wide organization. One is the general one on resources for the crisis in the Holy Land, which I think still can find on the front page of the website in the carousel that goes around there. But also, there have been statements that Presiding Bishop issued before she went on her leave, several in October. There was one Interfaith Leaders joint call for the ceasefire that she joined in mid-October. But a lot of statements have been issued by Churches for Middle East Peace, and I'm serving there on the board, so I'm actually involved in most of those, although not all of them. And then I wouldn't want you to forget that we do have these social statements that really provide much of the foundation for how we're going about this, that are covered in the Social Statement for Peace in God's World from 1995, and then the Social Message on Human Rights, which was developed a couple of years ago. So I think those are the major points I wanted to share, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Dennis, thank you for your wisdom, for sharing these facts and giving us access to information that maybe we would otherwise be blind to, and really appreciate your encouragement to check our news sources. A coaching question that I put into this space, friends, is how can we encourage those around us to do such things? So we can arrest, again, the growth of inappropriate and false narratives, and do our part in humanizing what is happening. Red, I really want to applaud the sharing of your personal story again, and what the capacity that hearing an individual story has to help us understand the circumstances that can give birth to such drastic behavior that we're seeing right now on both sides, right? So thank you for that. So friends, in this time, we talked before coming on that it might be more beneficial to give everyone access to the experts that we have in the room, and to stay as a large group for a time, and open to having questions. I do not know you to be shy people. And so friends, please bring your questions forth to Ryan and Dennis. Go ahead and unmute, friends, feel free.
I don't have questions. I work with the Episcopal Diocese of here in Seattle on this issue for the last 15 years or so. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One of the problems that we constantly see is people take their church group to the Holy Land, but they don't go to the West Bank. So they never really see that aspect of what's going on. So it's very critical that if you know of someone going there, that you encourage them to visit the West Bank. And there are groups that will do that for you. The other thing is, if you want to educate your community, probably one of the most resourceful groups of the Jewish Voice for Peace, that have a series of films that you can easily show and they cover a great deal. If you want a speaker, Jewish Voice for Peace is an organization also that is very helpful. It helps you avoid the charge of being anti-Semitic, and they are people who appreciate and care for Israel, but are still very critical of what the Israeli policy is. There's some other things, but I'll shut up for a while.
John, thank you for sharing. What comments or questions do you have, friends? In this very complex subject. Someone has their hand raised, please.
If it's my hand, my name is Fern Lee Hagedorn. And
Thank you, Fern.
first, an observation, and I appreciate, Dennis, you're talking about sources of information and media. And I think maybe when we look at social media, that's something very important. But as I watch CNN and MSNBC, there is still a bias, and the bias in that screen time. There's more screen time allotted to for example, the hostages that are being released versus the 4,000 Palestinian children who have died. Now, they show a teddy bear in a room where the young hostage has been released. But what a contrast. It's almost obscene to see a comparison. It's almost like you need a split screen to say, hey, this is this and this is that. You do the comparison. So it really upsets me to see the coverage. And thankfully, we can get Al Jazeera. Now, I'm not saying they're unbiased, but there's another perspective there, and very important that we don't see on CNN or MSNBC. And now my question is, often we hear Christians say, well, God gave the land to the Jewish people, Israel, and the Bible says that. So Israel is right. And how do you address that question?
Well, just to start, Fern, good to see you again. The the ELCA does have some resources available on Christian Zionism. We're in the process of actually revamping the whole effort that we've called Peace Not Walls over the last almost 20 years into a new approach. But I'm sure we will be keeping that a resource there. But this is an ongoing heresy. I mean, to put it bluntly, and also there's a new study, and I can share that with Jason for sharing onward later. There's a new study that the Lutheran World Federation has done on Christian-Jewish relations, which goes into this whole all the discussion of these sort of distorted theological approaches, as well as the whole matter of supersessionalism and that kind of thing. So that one just came out, I think it was in August, but I'll be sharing that with Jason so we can pass it on to you. But yeah, it's you can't always be prepared for a long discussion topic like that, but I try to make sure I prepare myself ahead of time for those sorts of things. Yeah, and in terms of the other sources, yes, Al Jazeera is one I would check. BBC, also Reuters, Associated Press, AP is of course American based, but Reuters and BBC are based in the UK. But of course, don't limit it to that. I mean, you can dig around and find lots of other sources. There are progressive Israeli publications. There are various other Palestinian publications and publications of others in the Middle East that will give you a different perspective.
Excellent comments. Great question, Fern. Who's next? What else is on your heart, on your minds? Kent S., I would like Red to say more about his family's loss of land for a bypass road. Thank you for inviting that. Red, what is your comfort level in responding to that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable sharing about that because it's simply it's part of the activities that were happening to a lot of people. Some of I know, so it's not a unique case. It's something that many people had to suffer. And in Israel, there's a very sophisticated system for court system, and in a way there's always a justification. They can always find a justification to do something that we would see as an illegal, which, for example, taking over a land that's owned by someone else. And so one of the things, one of the justifications was that connecting these two settlements was a security issue, and it's something that in the courts meant that it justifies taking a private land and making making sure that you can create this road that links the two settlements together. And the ironic part is that this road can only be used by the settlement. So, for example, my family who had that land, it was confiscated, but we can't use that road, unfortunately. It was part of the road that links Jerusalem itself through a tunnel system to the southern settlements in the West Bank. So while on a personal, on a family level, it was a sad thing. It was part of what was happening, unfortunately, in the West Bank. We have many examples. We know a lot of people that lost land because of such measures. I don't know if this answers the question. If you need more information about that,
Yeah, thank you for some more elaboration there, and I understand a great deal about it impacting so many other families, and I just think it's a powerful story of loss that you experienced personally. That is, you briefly mentioned it, and I think some more elaboration is helpful to discover, that the justification for taking your land was based on the illegal settlements and what was safe for that. And yeah, it's all wrong, but it gets twisted and used against you. And that must have been what, 30 years ago, or how long ago was that land taken for the bypass through?
Yes.
Yeah,
it was around.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit more for us.
Yeah, I would just add that with so many eyes focused these days on what's happening in Gaza, rightly so, there has been a rise in West Bank violence, significant rise. And I can share a pretty thorough article that came out from a group that I respect, the International Crisis Group, on that. The other, of course, is the activity of a similar nature going on in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, where there are land seizures going on, where settlers are taking over homes. And also there's now currently a pretty significant threat to the Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. So if you're interested in that as well, we can provide some resources on that. But there's, it appears that some people are taking advantage of the eyes being focused on Gaza to make other gains while at the expense of the Palestinian people.
Do we have one more question or comment to
I have-
share with our
I have
speakers?
one question. I'd like to know what Dennis or Raid think of the two-state solution. Many of the people I know there and here think that because of the settlements, a two-state solution is no longer viable.
I would say the same thing. Unfortunately, it's the facts on the ground that have been happening for the past 2 decades, I mean, at least. It's impossible to have a contiguous. I mean, from a logistical perspective, it's impossible. But also the attitudes and on the even the Israeli population has become much more um, aggressive or against the idea of a two-state solution. The reality on the ground does not allow for it. The government of Israel is much more right-wing, and they're actively working hard towards eliminating this solution, I guess. So I'm not hopeful, even though this should be, or at least it's the only viable solution. But the way things are happening, I don't see it being, taking shape.
Yeah, I would say personally, I agree. It's becoming less and less feasible as time goes on. But I also have to say that, just to give you an example of why we need to revamp our approach with Peace Not Walls, if you go to the church-wide strategy for engagement with Israel and Palestine, you will see support for a two-state solution there. It was written in 2005, right? And just today at the UN, several speakers were reiterating the two-state solution. And why? Because that is the official position the Security Council articulated about 15 years ago. And so the UN sticks to that, at least in terms of what the people in the Secretariat say. Now, governments say other things, but I think a lot of people are really asking, is this viable? At the same time, the question is, what kind of solution are we going to have otherwise?
So friends, here we are coming to the top of the hour. There is no doubt that we could have easily filled 6 hours of conversation with our two very generous speakers. I pray that this has been enlightening for you, that you are walking away with some new understanding of what's happening here. And I want to remind each of us that the people that we walk with in our faith communities, friends, they come at this situation from a huge spectrum of understanding, including that what is even Palestine? My first exposure to this concept was at a national youth gathering where I heard 3 young ladies who are from Palestine talking about a situation very similar to Raed. One of them, their generational olive grove was seized by the Israeli soldiers and literally cut in half. And their families were told, this half is now part of Israel. And just being startled by that, and not having an understanding of even where Palestine would be at on a map. And so as we hear our people in our communities speaking about this situation, it's important for us to reinforce our news sources, to seek educating ourselves about all of the perspectives that are happening, and primarily to do what we can. And I appreciate the links that will be shared with this recording. Do what we can to continue to promote a ceasefire, and that everything possible should be done for humanitarian efforts in this space. And above all, friends, may you pray. And as we end, I invite Jason to read the scripture that he's had behind him on the screen.
Thank you, Jill. I also put that in the chat, 2 different versions. Thus says the Lord. Oh, this is Jeremiah 22:3. Thus says the Lord, act with justice and righteousness, and deliver from the hand of the oppressor anyone who has been robbed, and do no wrong or violence to the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place.
Amen. May it be so. Dennis, Rayad, thank you so much for your time. Participants, as always, please know that you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved. I look forward to being with you again next week as we start our journey through Advent, right? Okay, see you then, friends. Thank you again, speakers.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much.
God bless you.
Shukran.
Shukran.